Hello, I'm really pleased to be joined by the outgoing president and CEO of ventureLAB, Melissa Chee. Melissa has completed a 5-year term as the organization's leader and has helped to create and launch, among many projects, the Hardware Catalyst Initiative, through which numerous startups in the advanced manufacturing space have been launched, specifically with regards to hardware and the semiconductor industry. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us. I did have a chance to sort of just look at the background of the news a little bit, and a huge congratulations for your tenure over there. You mentioned in a quote that what comes next is about scaling and requires a different playbook in regards to the future of ventureLAB. I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit of what you mean by that and what's in this other playbook.
Yeah, so first of all, I just want to thank you and the team at the organization for providing this opportunity for us and ventureLAB to kind of, this is really it's not really, the news is really more about just the amazing growth that the organization. So I'll start there, and then I think it'll provide a good framework of where I think the organization has the opportunity to move forward. When I joined the organization in 2017, we were a very different team. We were really a local hub as part of a larger and robust network in Ontario of innovation hubs, right? And one of the things I think that was really important having been in the tech sector on the private sector side from industry for the majority of my 25-year career, was really coming in with a different perspective, I think, in looking at what the ecosystem looked like and where the gaps were. And so that really formed, I think, the basis of really my role as the leader that was appointed in 2018 as the new CEO, and really providing at that time Ontario an opportunity to focus in a tech area that nobody else was looking at. And frankly, it was not just in Ontario, it was really across Canada. And that was in hardware, and particularly in semiconductors, right? And having grown and scaled a semiconductor startup myself, having been previously with Nortel and really building my career in those two anchor organizations, coming into the ecosystem where we look at, how do we scale great Canadian anchor tech titans, which we all in the ecosystem and across private and public industry now really understand the importance of having those anchor companies. Semiconductors now, let's call it post-pandemic, it's very clear how foundational they are, not just to technology, to economic growth, to creating, it's one of the most IP-rich sectors globally, but really affecting Canadians' lives, right? And so that was really the vision in 2017, 2018, going on a listening tour as was a great piece of advice of somebody who gave me as a new CEO coming in, to all of our stakeholders, whether those are partners, our founders, our board members, our team, right? And so over the last 5 years, I had this vision to really create Canada as a leader in the global semiconductor sector. And that was the backdrop for the Hardware Catalyst Initiative, which now everybody knows is Canada's only incubator and state-of-the-art lab to commercialize. And that's really the differentiator here. It is the commercialization of foundational technologies that are hardware semiconductor based, and scaling a great new generation of Canadian founders who are building great tech titans, right? And I think against that backdrop, that allowed ventureLAB to really carve out a unique position in the Canadian innovation ecosystem. And we also, I don't want to understate the importance of inclusivity. So the two blueprints that we put into play were really around how do we create a more robust and inclusive tech sector, and really build to scale tech titans. Those were the two anchors. And we did that at the intersection of really looking at our own organization and what that means to be an inclusive organization in a sector that is actually more vastly underrepresented than the general tech sector. And so with all of that, we scaled the organization from a team of, less around 14 in the mid-teens to now around 60. We operated in 2017, we were operating only in our Markham office, which continues to be, we support, this region is very rich in kind of deep tech. That's still our anchor position, but we now have teams across the country, right? And we have partners across the country and globally with about 60, a team of 60. So we 4x'd the organization. And when we look at the intersection of hardware and inclusivity, that is a really exciting juncture to be in terms of how we've actually expanded the organization from a local hub to a pan-Canadian hub. And so, you know, after a lot of reflection, and certainly no comments, certainly I think on the opportunities that ventureLAB has in front of us, it is really about this first 5 years, or my tenure for the first 5 years, was about reinvention and transformation, bold transformation. And that, as a leader, for me personally, is exactly the ideal spot for someone like me to really catalyze a really bold and big bet play and put it into motion, right? Actually get the first kind of couple phases, 2 or 3 phases going, right? Setting out a big vision, reinventing the organization, building the team and the culture that's required in order to take that forward, and actually getting some really massive wins, whether it's HCI. We've built out also a pan-Canadian capital investment program. We also are a partner with Scale AI, where we have an AI initiative as well, and programming. So there's really some really big bets that we played at the intersection of where we're known for. And I think as part of a 10-year plan, you know, the second half, it's scaling. And for me, as a having been in this sector, in the private sector for most of my career, that's actually what I've done for most of my career, is scaling organizations, strategic execution and operational excellence. And that's what comes next. I obviously could do that role. That's not where I want to spend. I think I can have a bigger impact in a more broader context. And I think this organization deserves a leader who really is passionate about those things, right? For me, this is really the opportunity of a lifetime that this team and this ecosystem and the board has provided. And it's been a real treat to be able to put such a big vision before anyone knew about chips and before anyone really cared about what chips were, to be at that forefront and really drive a Canadian narrative and a Canadian strategy that I believe is going to be very critical as this country goes forward, right? But what I meant was, in terms of different playbook, is it's all about scaling. And at every stage of an organization's life, you as a leader, as the CEO, need to know you can, see there are some leaders who love to be at all stages, and I think it requires a pretty high level of, I guess, self-awareness to know where is it really optimal, where can you actually show up to be your very best. And for me, that's exactly the period that we went through. And I think we have a great team that's in place to take that bold vision for ventureLAB continuing forward. So I hope that clarifies a little bit about what I meant.
No, it definitely does. No, thank you, Melissa, for that incredible in-depth answer. It's clear that you were part of some major projects at ventureLAB, and helped to launch numerous commercialized and successful companies in the semiconductor and hardware space. And I'm glad you clarified and expanded on how much scaling and what the focus is going to be for the next 5 years for ventureLAB. I did want to sort of look back on your tenure and sort of ask you about what you were most proud of at ventureLAB in terms of the work that you did there. If you can just, I guess, I know it's probably impossible to try and keep it to the one thing, I guess, that you're most proud of there.
Can I pick 3? And I'm going to start with the largest one.
Sure.
I believe, and I know lots of CEOs and leaders say that culture is really important. But this couldn't be more true. The culture and the team, the people that we've been able to retain. There are some people at the organization is 12 years old. So I kind of came in its midlife. There are people who have been here for all 12 years. And there's an incredible amount of new people who have joined in the last 5-6 years, and then even more who have joined in the last year. Right. And as I said in our earlier part of the conversation, we went from kind of mid-teens to close to 60, from local to multiple locations. And one of the first things that was really important to me as a new leader coming in, was really to build what we now call our river culture, which stands for the 5 core values of relentlessness, innovation, inclusivity, vision, and results focus. Those are our 5 core values that, as the organization has scaled, and they're tied to behaviors, right? So those are our core values. And then we have very specific behaviors that the team has worked together to foster as we've grown, to align on, when we say relentlessness, this is what we expect of each other. When we say innovation, this is what we expect of each other. And that has really percolated not just within the ventureLAB team, but certainly that also percolates to and is expected in terms of how do we deliver those exceptional experiences for our ecosystems, for our customers, for our founders, right? We're here to help great founders scale, and our partners who are working with us to help those founders and companies scale. Right. So I think it really starts in all organizations, if they're successful, is really a sustainable culture. And so I'm starting with that, not because it's trendy, but because it really is the reason why I believe we have been able to attract such a incredible team, talented, diverse team of anywhere from capital experts to technical experts to experts who, executives who have scaled their own business, who are ex-founders and entrepreneurs themselves, right? This is a very industry-led organization with a lot of industry experience. And I think we did it from a place that, if we want to be a better example or a living example for the ecosystem of what it looks like for an inclusive organization, then we need to make sure that we are living by those values before we can tell others or share our experiences with others to do that. And we've been recognized for it, right? We are 3-time certified as a great place to work, in particular for inclusivity, for professional development managed by women, as well as in technology, right, in Canada. So that is an external third-party analysis, right, of hundreds and thousands of other organizations like ours, across Canada. And that is external validation of, is this the place where people are going to choose to work? And I think that certainly goes a long way. And we also have been recognized as one of Canada's most admired corporate cultures, right, in the not-for-profit category. And so those, did we do it so that we could get awards? Absolutely not. It's validation that, and then when you look at the performance-based culture that we have built, and you look at the types of results that we've achieved, right? We have now created over 5,000 different jobs, raised more than $340 million in terms of our portfolio. There's multipliers of the IP that's been created, the revenue that's been generated, the capital that's been raised by our portfolio companies. That is multipliers of where it was even just, 5 years ago. And when we look at the broader context of why does an organization like ventureLAB even exist, it's to create economic impact, right? And it's not just job creation. These are high-paying, skilled jobs. This is attraction of talent, and it's attraction of investment, not just to our local ecosystem and the companies that we're scaling, but to the ecosystem. So first and foremost, it's culture. And then I've talked about some of the results. I think the other piece that I'm really proud of is having this bold vision, and putting into play about what Canada's role should be in the global semiconductor ecosystem, right? And the vision around the Hardware Catalyst Initiative and the team that we've been able to attract, right? The Hardware Catalyst Initiative is unique, really not in Canada, in North America. It is the only type of incubator and lab of its kind, which is exclusively focused for commercialization, right, in this semiconductor sector. And in partnership with our partners in government who provided the very strategic investments through FedDev Ontario and others, at the federal level, we've been able to attract 47 of the world's largest semiconductor industry players, right? So private sector is coming to the table, and they're investing into the Canadian innovators and sector experts in the semiconductor sector. The third piece I'm going to talk about is, again, where we've built a lot of leadership. And again, it started with looking inside first, because I have, as a leader, I'm a big believer of you need to lead by example, and you should make sure that you live by those core values before you can really credibly share experiences with others. And that's around inclusivity, right? So 60% of our management team and our leadership team, we are a proud partner of the federal 50/30 diversity challenge, is either female or diverse. More than 40% of our team identifies as a visible minority, right? And that, did we go out and say we need those targets? Absolutely not. We're attracting the best talent to the team, right? And by doing that, you end up with a broad base of diverse experiences, diverse perspectives, and you can see the culmination in terms of the results that I just kind of walk through, right? So, what am I most proud of? Culture, first and foremost, because without people, amazing people who choose, that's the difference. They're choosing to be here. There are people on our team who, this is a competitive job market in tech. We know that, even though it's going through a bit of a dip. There are lots of places for people to choose to go, but they're choosing to join ventureLAB, right? And they're coming from not just in our local ecosystem, they're coming from across the country. And some of them are relatively new to this country, which means we're attracting also international talent, right? Which is amazing. So I would say those are the kind of three pillars of what I'm most proud of. And I think lastly, just to kind of close off on the inclusivity piece, having ventureLAB as a starting blueprint of what an inclusive organization looks like, the team has now really taken that on to operationalize that into how we work with our founders. And last year in 2022, more than 60% of our companies were led by diverse founders, right? And I talked about the impact that those founders are having in terms of raising capital and the jobs they're creating, right? This is significant because when you expand the pool wider and you cast that net, you get the best talent coming to the table.
No, absolutely. No, I'm glad you gave such an in-depth answer. It's
All my answers are too in-depth. I'm sorry.
no, this is great for our leadership and everyone, our readership, sorry, and everyone who's going to listen and watch. It's clear ventureLAB took like a real big leadership position in terms of creating like a culture and being a pioneer and a champion of successful inclusivity among startups and things like that. So no, it's great that you gave that answer. Sort of on the side of that, I did want to ask you sort of what was the biggest challenge or something that was difficult to navigate over your tenure at ventureLAB, with an eye to sort of, I guess, what you would say to the incoming CEO with that in mind, I guess.
Yeah, so it's a tricky spot, right? Because it's really, I think in terms of, I'll kind of caveat my answer in terms of what was the biggest challenge, and this is a more general piece, I think, as leaders go through different stages. I think it's the culture. I think a lot of leaders talk about culture. Very few, and this is not just a reflection of my leadership. This is about the team, our leadership team, our broader team, about the commitment to the culture. And so that for sure, we spent a lot of effort, in 2018 leading into 2019, making sure that there was alignment and buy-in, right? And this is not about, thou shall be XYZ, right? This is making sure that the team buys into, this is the type of organization I want to work at, right? These are the types of behaviors that I expect of my colleagues, right? And my peers. And regardless of position in the organization, right? As an organization like ours goes through what I would deem as pretty rapid growth, and high growth and intense growth, you often end up sometimes, and that's been my previous experience, and I'm sure many others, as you scale, there are challenges as you scale, right? There are communication gaps. There are things around silos that can sometimes occur. And what gets people through those times is making sure that you have a really strong culture and aligned base of core values. So that challenge or opportunity, depending on which way you want to frame it, but I think that was really important. And I can tell you full-heartedly, and the team would agree, that as we enter the pandemic, as everyone else did in 2020, it was the culture that actually allowed us to thrive, where other, let's say, organizations that are similar to us actually contracted in the pandemic. We continued to scale and grow. And I believe, no leader, none of us expected to lead in those unprecedented times. But I do believe when you have the right people at the table with the aligned vision and a common understanding of what the job is in front of you and how to communicate with each other when things aren't going so well, that to me is kind of the crown jewel of whether organizations thrive or survive, right? I think the other piece for me is I was a new CEO in 2018. I've spent most of my career as an operational executive, as COO and those types of things, and product management, and in the private sector. So two of my biggest learnings coming into what I would call, ventureLAB's a not-for-profit, is understanding the incredible dynamics that occur on the public sector side, which was completely new to me, right? And it is an art and a science in terms of navigating public sector and government relations. But I think one of the key things is really understanding that, like any other relationship, whether it's personal or business, people are just people. Right? And you just need to understand what the person sitting on the other side of the table, what is motivating them to be there, where are the areas of strategic alignment, and how do you foster those pieces of strategic alignment, right? My leadership style is like anyone else's, is a little different, I think. I've been described by the team and others as incredibly bold and visionary. The other piece that I'm really proud of, and I believe that our team would also concur, is I do believe that you can be a bold, visionary, very results-focused, ambitious leader, but you can also be empathetic. And I think as we're moving forward into a, let's call it a post-pandemic kind of world, having really strong empathy and understanding that is as important, and it is certainly not mutually exclusive to all the other pieces, right? In terms of being bold and ambitious and driving forward, right? One's ability to understand people and really understand where they're coming from, I think is a really critical factor, something that I'm proud of, and something, that is just authentic to me. So is that what the next person needs? I honestly, that I don't think that's even a relevant question. I think the organization, the board, is going to decide whether to continue on this bold path, and I believe that there's a lot of support to do that, and I think that's where everyone's headed. And for me, I think it's being able to be comfortable with the fact that, yes, some people don't like the empathy part. There's still a perception sometimes that it's soft. But I can tell you that, being able to listen very effectively for me and for the organization, I think helped us because I'm not afraid to ask questions. I'm not afraid to say, you know what, I don't come from the public sector. I'm not sure how government relations quite works, right? And we are, we are partially publicly funded. So being able to understand those worlds and be really effective at the intersection of private and public sector, I think is something that I'm very thankful that I had the opportunity to learn, and have a huge amount of respect and appreciation for public sector, right? In terms of just the complexities of the stakeholders that have to be supported, engaged, and aligned with, right?
No, I'm glad you clarified, Melissa. Thank you. Yeah, it's clear there were, some challenges, and I appreciate you sort of diving into, I guess, what the next leader, I guess, will sort of need to keep an eye on and need to sort of be aware of. And I know you're still on the advisory board, but I'm sort of curious professionally, like what's next for you and what you're focused on. I know earlier you alluded to you being much more passionate, interested in projects that have a broader focus as opposed to like scaling up. So I'm just curious if you can give us any details there.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is truly for my career, this has truly been such an incredible opportunity. and one that I've got an incredible amount of gratitude. I am, the board has asked, ventureLAB's board has asked me to stay on as a strategic advisor until the successor is appointed, which I'm happy to do so. And as I said in public, more public forums, I am going to take the summer, right? There are very few times in one's career where you can really take a pause. And certainly there are a lot of possibilities. There are a lot of opportunities in terms of where I go next and what I do next. But as I've shared, and happy to kind of reiterate here, it will be at the intersection of the things that I've always championed, even before ventureLAB, which is going to be, semiconductors. That's something that I understand very well, and I'm very passionate. I believe that Canada, needs to have a national strategy around that. I think it's going to be important. And then more broadly, in terms of the Canadian innovation ecosystem, I think, one of the things that I really enjoy is being at that intersection of being able to bring the industry expertise that I have combined with the public sector expertise and understanding of the broader ecosystem stakeholders. And I think the third area where I'm very passionate about and have been is inclusivity, particularly in tech, but also I've done a lot of work outside of ventureLAB throughout my years in terms of championing STEM and women in tech, and STEM even from the K-12 perspective and post-secondary, right? So it's really in those kind of buckets of areas where I believe I can bring additional value, have some learned and shared experience that I hope is valued, and really looking at really board advisory and strategic advisory type of roles at a broader national level or global perspective, and working with some great, hopefully private sector tech companies as they're on their later stage in terms of their scale journey.
No, that's great. It's really exciting to hear. Obviously, you will be definitely keeping an eye on where you choose to go next, because I feel like the industry in Canada here still needs your leadership, obviously, to help grow the industry in the semiconductor space. So definitely eye on that. And then sort of finally, I did want to ask you, in your opinion, I guess this is a more of a broader question. Sort of where does the semiconductor industry need to go, and sort of what does it need to do to sort of navigate what you think are the upcoming challenges, whether that's in the supply chain, whether that's the labor shortage, whether that's any environmental challenges. What beyond scaling, what are the priorities for the next leader? What are the priorities for ventureLAB over the next few years?
I think for ventureLAB, the focus around continuing to create this commercial pipeline of companies in this sector is going to be really important, not just for the local ecosystem, for Canada, right? We've now had 60 to 70 different companies be selected for the Hardware Catalyst Initiative. And there's a really unique opportunity to make sure that goes pan-Canadian, right? And there is a pan-Canadian imperative, I think, in order to make sure that we have this broad commercial pipeline of companies. So I think that's certainly important, and really where ventureLAB shines, right, in terms of the commercialization pipeline. I think broadly, to answer your question, more broadly in the Canadian semiconductor, realm, Canada, it's urgent, right? We have this narrowing window of opportunity where Canada has to come up and be bold in terms of identifying a national semiconductor strategy, no different than we did 10 years ago on artificial intelligence and more recently in quantum, right? Semiconductors, as we all know, and now it's very well-known fact, but it certainly wasn't 3 or 4 years ago. Semiconductors and that type of technology are not only what kind of talent and companies and expertise that Canada has, it also fuels almost every one of the priorities that our industries, anything from aerospace to life sciences to automotive, right, to realizing what a clean economy and net zero economy actually looks like, that's all fueled by chips, right? If you look at the automotive sector, 50% of the cost as it's going through electrification is going to be in chips, right? And so Canada has to figure out, and with urgency, about where do we have strategic value that really inserts us as a strategic part of that global supply chain. I think the other piece is that working with our favorable trade relationships, whether that's east-west or north-south, particularly in the North American supply chain, that making sure that we onshore critical pieces as part of a more resilient supply chain in North America. And we just had the Trilateral Summit a couple weeks ago in Washington. Figuring out and being very crisp about which aspects that Canada can really continue over the long term to add value. And there are several, but we need to move, right, with urgency. And then I think the third piece is really around what you talked about. You framed it as labor shortage. I'm going to frame it as talent opportunity. And that to me is where Canada is an untapped resource, and not to do what Canadians always do, which is export our talent, but it's really because we have some of the world's best semiconductor post-secondary institutions, from colleges to universities, creating the talent of the current semiconductor sector, but also what's needed for the future. And to me, that's a really great way and an impactful way, I think, for Canada to play a more strategic role in the global semiconductor sector, which is going to attract major investments into Canada, leverages our strategic trade relationships, and also allows us to continue to have this commercial pipeline of IP-rich Canadian-founded companies, right, in the sector, which is what we also want to see. So I think it's going to be a very interesting, but it's a really urgent and it's a really critical time for our country to really come together with a united voice around a national strategy. And I think, I'm really excited to see and hopefully be able to contribute in some way, shape, or form as we move those things forward.
Yeah, no, we're just as excited, to see, how the semiconductor industry develops. I'm glad you pressed upon the urgency as well of coming up with the national strategy, and how important it is to continue to secure our talent pipeline, and make sure that that's not being continually exported to other places in other countries and things like that. So no, it's definitely a continuing burgeoning industry that we need to take a leadership role on. So I'm glad you helped expand on that. But I think that takes care of all of the questions that I had. Melissa, I really wanted to thank you for taking the time to sit down with us. We really appreciate you giving us your insight and your expertise here as you talked about your work at ventureLAB, and really appreciate you for the time, the 5 years you spent there, and thank you again for taking time out of your busy day to sit down with us.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to I know ventureLAB is going to continue to play a critical and it's really strategic role in the sector. And I know more broadly, Canada just has so many opportunities. So appreciate the time.